Another one of Wayne Klein's bosses commented to us that he's the worst kind of, this is quote, Mr. Klein is the worst kind of loose cannon. He's often going after someone who's offended him, regardless of the law. He's really only effective if someone with very strong supervisory skills watches his every move. And again, it naturally leads to the question, how in the world did Klein get there? And are the citizens of Utah willing to pay attention to what's going on? When Ms. Gianni says there's no one better, I think securities attorneys in Utah should be alarmed. They should be offended. I know many competent securities attorneys who are better. And you could do that. I mean, all you have to do is ask them 10 questions. But the other reason they should be alarmed is because Ms. Gianni is still the executive director of the Department of Commerce, and she'll likely pick another Wayne Klein to run the division. And so I think it's time that we hold her to a higher standard. You know, pick somebody who's going to be in charge of that division who actually knows securities laws, first of all, and secondly, who has a reputation for being fair. Because remember, business owners are citizens entitled to equal protection under the law, just like consumers are. In America, at least. You know, not in Hugo Chavez's Venezuela, but in the United States of America, businessmen are citizens too. And Ayn Rand famously observed that statement that a businessman has no way of knowing in advance whether what he's doing is against the law until after a judge's verdict, and that's the problem with people like this. Sources tell us that Ms. Gianni may already be vying for her position, or for a position back at Utah's local Channel 2 KUTV alongside consumer watchdog Bill Gephardt. And if that's true, it's likely that Ms. Gianni can serve the people of Utah better there. Because I think there's a role for investigative kind of consumer watchdog journalists. But the problem is when the governor invests you with power to be a teacher, an investigator, a judge, and a jury over behavior of businessmen, you've got a higher standard than a normal investigative journalist. Unless you think that my statements here are an exaggeration, I want you to consider, let me quote from the paper again. This is from the Salt Lake Tribune. Concerned about the state's handling of the First Western case, that's the Gary Turan case I referenced earlier, and after hearing from several division staff members who expressed concern about how the agency was being run. Okay, this isn't talk radio people expressing concern. These are people who work for Francine Gianni. Okay. Representative Jim Byrd of West Jordan late last year requested a legislative audit from the Auditor General's office in the legislature. And Byrd has also introduced legislation that would rein in, quote, rein in the powers of the division's director. You see, this is a big deal. I don't know why it's not getting more coverage than it is. And this attempt to rein in the powers of Miss Gianni and her flying monkeys is being received about as well as the Wicked Witch of the West receiving Dorothy and her ruby slippers. I mean, it's reminiscent of something behind the Iron Curtain in the 1980s. The outgoing Commissar Klein remarked to an attorney not long ago that because of his client's political activities, Wayne Klein was forced to take tougher action. He said, quote, part of the problem is that I've been painted into a corner because your client's gone out and publicly accused us of stuff. He's got legislators out there trying to cut our powers because of what we're doing, as if he's entirely right in what he's doing, and government is unfairly coming after him. Now think about this. Is the statement of a government regulator. Is he enforcing the law, or is he protecting his reputation? Remember, this is the same guy who said, I'm stepping down to avoid criticism. What a coward. He says, quoting, so ordinarily we have more flexibility, but where I've got public attacks coming in saying we're being accused of being unfair. Well, with government officials behaving like that, it's no wonder, A, that Klein's announced his resignation, and B, that the state legislature has initiated an audit of that department. The paper says the audit began in early November as an informal examination, but later it was upgraded to a formal evaluation after auditors determined they needed more time to understand the complexity of the Securities Division's work. And that's from Tim Osterstock, an audit manager in the Auditor General's office. Then Byrd goes on to say, they obviously haven't told me the results of the audit, but I've heard words like, the division is in disarray, and the deeper we, the auditors, go, the deeper we need to go. Byrd said last week during a meeting of the House Business and Labor Committee. You can hear that online, by the way. The minutes are public, and you can hear that audio. The official audit of Misciani and her staff is still underway, and potential legal action possibly is also reportedly underway against the state from private parties alleging damages in the hundreds of millions. Additional complaints are coming in from victims of the division's abusive handling methods. Transcripts and audio recordings of Commerce employees breaking the law, lying about businessmen and their activities, lying to elected officials to obfuscate the trail of abusive activity, and state investigators have recently been found unjustly cooperating with convicted financial fraud felons and private sector colleagues seeking to aggrandize their own personal ambitions, while Utah investors, the real quote-unquote ma's and pa's, as my kinds like to call them, are getting tired of being scammed by the so-called scam busters. Some investors are apparently even being told that if they want the state to help them, they have to cooperate with the state's agenda independent of the facts. Matter of fact, we just heard an audio recording last week of a person who is told that they had to lie, that the government wanted them to lie about some of the businesses that they were investigating, to make sure that justice was done. I mean, this is crazy. This is crazy. If there's some wrongdoing going on, let the government prosecute the wrongdoing fairly. And if not, it creates a system where the victims out there are actually being victimized by the government because the government's using them to defend their reputation, not to actually go out and pursue justice. So I would say, while the citizens of the state are waiting for the governor to weigh in on the issue, thank goodness for good legislators and legislative leaders who don't hesitate to reach for the pail of water when the wicked witch comes around. And on a side note, if Misciani does return to the media, perhaps she'll feel less burdened, being freed from sticky things like state law, due process, fairness, etc. Perhaps it's time for people, including our highest elected officials, to get past the old cliche of Utah being among the scam capitals of the world and take a closer look at the corrupt bureaucrats irresponsibly promoting that myth to the detriment of good people in a good state working hard to do many good things. And it's the free capitalist opinion that freedom-loving Utahns, and specifically hard-working small businessmen, have a few things to say in the meantime related to this unfortunate scandal brewing in Utah. So stay tuned. We've got more coming up in the weeks ahead about what's happening in Utah. Unless you think that my motives are other than what they are, listen, there's a lot of talk on the internet by crazy people who pretend to be honest. But here's my general rule of thumb, okay? For what it's worth. For those of you who are interested in justice and fairness, be leery of those who won't put their own name and reputation on the line when calling in to question the name and reputation of others. Be leery of those who lie to convict liars. Be weary of those who are unfair to protect you from unfairness. Be weary of those in government who use force to do what they say is wrong. Be leery of people on the internet who use fake names to tell half-truths. We'll be back in a minute. This is Rick Kerber. I'm the Free Capitalist. Keep your brain on.